In November of 1966, the Beatles had finished their final concert tour and headed into the studio to start recording Sgt. Pepper. Ronald Reagan was elected governor of California, New Orleans was granted an NFL franchise, and a giant winged creature was spotted in West Virginia. Wait, what? And since then, this elusive cryptid has become a pop culture icon, and in its day was bigger than Elvis. And that in itself is extremely strange. On November 12, 1966, in Clendenin, West Virginia, Kenneth Duncan was digging a grave for his father-in-law, Homer Smith, with 4 other men, when he looked up from his work and spotted something very strange. He watched as something huge soared over their heads. Duncan described it as a massive man-like figure that was moving rapidly from tree to tree, saying it resembled a brown human being. Unfortunately, none of the other men noticed the creature as it passed overhead and flew out of sight. This would be the first reported sighting of the being who came to be known as the Mothman, an elusive creature that remains as mysterious today as it was when the first witnesses laid eyes upon it. 3 days later, on November 15, 1966, 2 young married couples from Point Pleasant, Roger and Linda Scarberry, and Steve and Mary Millette, were driving together in the Scarberry's black 1957 Chevy on Route 62 near the TNT area, the site of a former World War II munitions plant, when they came upon a gray man-like figure with wings walking around the corner of the old power plant. They said that the creature didn't run, but instead wobbled unsteadily. When the giant eyes of the creature shone bright red in the car's headlights, the group instantly began to panic, and Roger sped away toward town. The couples were terrified to see the strange being rise up, as they said, like a helicopter, and start pursuing them. It might have been awkward on land, but after taking flight, it easily matched the vehicle's speed of 100 miles an hour, all the while making a hideous screeching noise. They could clearly see it through the back window and watched its shadow go across the car as it flew. They also heard the wings hitting the top of the car as they drove. It's even said to have left scratch marks on Roger's '57 Chevy. Linda Scarberry described it as a slender, muscular man, about 7 feet tall with white wings. However, she was unable to discern its face due to what she described as the hypnotic effect of its eyes. The creature eventually gave up the chase as the car and its frightened occupants reached the city limits of Point Pleasant. There the creature disappeared, veering off into a field. They stopped at the local Dairyland and discussed what they should do next. Linda insisted they go to the police, but Steve and Roger assumed they'd be laughed out of the station. They entertained the idea of going back to make certain of what they had seen, but thought better of that and turned around to leave. As they did, they saw a large dog lying dead in the road when the winged creature jumped out as they passed by where the dog was, flew over the top of the car, and into the field on the other side. They turned around and returned to town and pulled into Tiny's diner, where they hoped to see a policeman and report what they had experienced. They ran into a friend there and told him about what they saw and asked him to call the police. After telling an officer what happened, they drove back up the road with their friend and the police trailing about a half-mile behind them. When they passed by the spot where the carcass of the dog once was, it had disappeared. When they got closer to the TNT area, the couples in the lead car spotted the creature again in a pasture with its wings a bit unfurled, walking towards their vehicle before it took flight and came right at them. As their friend's car came over the rise in the road and its light shined on it, the being disappeared. Eventually they met up with Millard Halstead, who listened as they spoke about the flying man with 10-foot wings and glowing eyes, who didn't seem to like the car's headlights shining on it, and that chased them all the way into Point Pleasant. Halstead, as expected, had a difficult time believing them, but none of them were known instigators, and they all were clearly scared about something they saw, so Halstead took them back to the TNT area to shine his patrol car spotlight around the area and have a look for himself. It's said that while the deputy could find no sign of the creature, his radio, on the other hand, experienced some static disturbances he couldn't explain. Meanwhile, the two couples claimed to see shadows circling nearby and a cloud of dust forming in a nearby coal yard as they watched from the car. When they all left, the Millettes chose to stay with the Scarberrys in their trailer as they were too frightened to return to their own home. That night, the lights were left on, and none of them were able to sleep. The following day, Sheriff George Johnson called a press conference in which he gave details of the previous night's sighting. The press ran with the story, and an AP reporter out of Charleston, West Virginia, called the entity Mothman, a take on the popular Batman TV series, which had by now debuted on ABC. Steve Millett made it clear they knew people were having a laugh at their expense, but insisted they would not make up a story like this to look like fools. That same day, the Scarberrys and Millettes returned to the TNT area and discovered some unusual tracks similar to two horseshoes put together, except smooth. Steve claimed to see something fly up inside an old boiler when they kicked the door open, but they chose to leave quickly rather than explore any further. That night, November 16th, at the Ralph Thomas family home, a red light was spotted in the sky moving over and hovering above the TNT plant. A friend of the family, Marcella Bennett, also saw it and claimed it wasn't an airplane, but they couldn't figure out what it actually was. Marcella then drove to the Thomas house with her new baby, and as she got out of the car, she saw a figure move near the vehicle. It seemed as though it had been lying down, she recalled. It rose up slowly from the ground, a big gray thing, bigger than a man with terrible glowing eyes. Marcella was so frightened by the figure that she dropped the baby, but quickly gathered her up and ran toward the house. The doors were all locked, but they were overcome by fear when they saw the creature come up onto the porch and gaze through the windows. The police were called, but by the time they arrived, whatever this creature was had since vanished. Marcella Bennett was traumatized by the incident and would seek medical assistance to help deal with her lingering fear. She was plagued by terrifying dreams and would tell investigators that she was certain the creature was observing her, as she could repeatedly hear what sounded like a woman screaming near her home in Point Pleasant. A footnote to the events of that night were the claims made by building contractor Newell Partridge, who lived about 90 miles away from Point Pleasant in the town of Salem. He said that at 10:30 that same evening as the couple's sighting, while watching TV, the screen suddenly went black, and then a weird pattern emerged on it. He then heard loud whining sounds from outside that he likened to a generator starting up. The pitch got higher before completely stopping. His dog Bandit began to howl on the porch, and Partridge went outside to take a look. Bandit was facing toward a hay barn that was perhaps 150 yards from the house. Turning a flashlight toward it, Partridge saw what he described as two red circles that resembled bicycle reflectors and got a bit spooked by them. Bandit, however, shot off toward the glowing objects, ignoring his owner's calls for him to stop. Partridge went back into the house and that night slept with his gun next to the bed. Bandit was missing the following morning and never returned. It was 2 days later that Partridge read about the goings-on in Point Pleasant. He came forward because he assumed that perhaps the dead dog they found was Bandit. The story spread quickly and large crowds gathered in the TNT area the following night, including Mary Heyer, a reporter from the Athens Messenger. As they all stared in the direction of the power plant, Linda Scarberry spotted the glowing eyes in a field, which Mary Heyer confirmed also seeing. Some men in the group returned after checking out the building, just as a clanging noise was heard from inside. When they investigated, they found a previously closed door had been opened. In a week's time, the papers were reporting similar sightings, and speculation began as to what this creature may be and what its origins were. The media's fascination with the subject continued through 1967 as the story went national and international. It was even featured in the Pacific Stars and Stripes newspaper, which was issued to American troops in Vietnam. Linda and Roger Scarberry reported experiencing some strange things in their home. The most baffling were the sounds of something that sounded like a phonograph record being sped up, and other activity that fell into the realm of poltergeist manifestations. Odd lights appeared throughout the house, objects moved by themselves, and the heavy odor of cigar smoke was frequently noted even though no one in the family smoked. Linda once claimed to have seen the creature a number of times on the roof of the house, suggesting that she didn't feel it wanted to hurt anyone, but instead wished to communicate. These events continued into 1967 when the couple moved in with Linda's parents, but they claimed the odd activity followed them there. Around midnight one night, Linda, her aunt, and her 5-month-old daughter Danny were all asleep in their bedroom when Linda suddenly awoke and saw the shadowy form of a man in the room. The kitchen light had been left on, providing enough light to make out his features. Linda described him as wearing a black and white checkered shirt with black pants. He had black crew-cut hair and dark eyes that she never saw blink. As he stood there staring at her, Linda said she felt paralyzed and couldn't move. The intruder then took a cigarette out of his shirt pocket and lit it. A gold crucifix hanging above the baby's bed reflected the striking of the match, which captured the man's attention. Linda turned to look at it as well, but when she turned back, he was gone. Linda claimed that her aunt later awoke and described having dreamed the exact series of events that happened in the room. The house was searched, the doors were found locked, and there was no sign of an intruder. Connie Jo Carpenter, a reserved 18-year-old and the niece of Mary Hire, was driving past the Mason County Golf Course on her way home from church on November 27, 1966, when she spotted a huge gray figure resembling a man but much larger. She described it as approximately 7 feet tall and very broad with intensely glowing, almost hypnotic red eyes. As she slowed down, keeping her attention on the creature, it began to unfold a set of wings on its back which seemed to span at least 10 feet. It steadily and silently rose straight up off the ground and, not flapping its wings at all, headed straight at Connie's car, its ghastly eyes fixed intently on her. Connie pressed the accelerator to the floor and drove as fast as she could out of the area as it swooped directly over her. Among other reported encounters, in August of 1966, Lawrence Gray returned home from church at 9:30 p.m. and had an eerie feeling someone was inside the house as he approached the steps. As he entered, his anxiety grew stronger, but other than a hook-style latch on his door being undone, couldn't find anything else. Lawrence and his wife were in bed by 10:30 or 11 p.m., but around 3 a.m. he awakened and looked out a bedroom window to see a car pulling into the nearby church parking lot. When he turned away, he claimed he saw a 6-foot-tall figure with sunken eyes and large wings standing in the room with its shoulders arched and its head tilted. He was described as being gray and white. When Lawrence saw the being, he was paralyzed with fear and could not move or make a sound. Convinced the being was the devil, Lawrence focused on Bible verses until the creature vanished under a minute later. On November 1st, 1966, a National Guardsman at the Armory near Camp Connolly Road in Point Pleasant claimed to have seen a large brown humanoid figure perched on the limb of a tree. On Wednesday, November 2nd, 1966, Woodrow Derenberger, a sewing machine company salesman, was driving a red panel truck from Marietta, Ohio to his home in Mineral Wells, West Virginia. Around 7:25 p.m. on the intersection of Interstate 77 and Route 47 in Parkersburg, West Virginia, a dark gray 30 to 35-foot long craft hovering about 8 to 10 inches off the ground passed him, blocked the road in front of him, and forced him to a stop. The craft had no windows or lights, was charcoal in coloration, and appeared metallic in Derenberger's headlights. A figure appearing to be a normal human being stepped out of a door on the side of the craft and approached the passenger side of his truck. Derenberger claimed that the man telepathically instructed him to roll down his window and proceeded to engage in conversation with him without ever speaking. The craft reportedly rose up and hovered about 50 to 75 feet over the road during this exchange. Derenberger said that the man smiled and pleasantly inquired who he was and where he lived, among other things, claiming he responded to the questions verbally. He was told by the visitor not to be afraid and that he was a searcher whose name was Cold. The man also said places like Parkersburg are referred to as gatherings by his race. Cold was wearing a dark blue zippered overcoat made of a glossy reflective material, with a navy blue button shirt underneath with navy blue pants. Derenberger claimed he looked to be about 35 to 40 years of age, had combed back dark brown hair, and appeared extremely tanned. He stood with his arms folded during the duration of their conversation. Cole ended the discussion by saying, "We will be seeing you again," before the craft lowered itself back onto the road and Cole stepped inside. Derenberger reported seeing a hand of someone inside the craft close the hinge door before the craft lifted off. Along with Mothman, there also came a number of UFO sightings which resulted in encounters with the notorious Men in Black in the area. Unknown individuals, usually dressed from head to toe in black suits, white shirts, black ties, and black shoes, who appeared to be impeccable in dress and similar in appearance, but completely out of style for the late 60s, and they started to appear in Point Pleasant on a regular basis. They questioned people about the Mothman and then would inform them not to speak about it. Reporter Mary Heyer said they visited her to question her about the creature, but one is said to have also threatened her niece, Mothman witness Connie Jo Carpenter. A friend of Mary's named Dottie Campbell once said that she and Mary were very frightened by them, and that Mary noticed these strange men never blinked their eyes, a trait observed by Linda Scarberry in her bizarre encounter in the bedroom. Linda described their appearance the same way others did, but also claimed they drove black Cadillacs and that their skin was somewhat transparent, as you could see the veins in their hands very clearly. Their fingers were longer than normal, and her father claimed when he shook their hands, they did so very awkwardly, as if this was a new custom to them. She also said a group of 3 of them would follow them around in their car from time to time. A man and a woman driving a Volkswagen visited Steve and Mary Millette, wanting to take a picture of them. After doing so, the Millettes took down their license plate, but when the police ran the plate, they said the number didn't exist. Throughout 1966 and 67, bizarre goings-on continued in Point Pleasant, resulting in paranormal investigators, ufologists, and cryptid specialists flooding the area. The abandoned TNT plant became ground zero for the base of operations of the Mothman, perhaps because it seemed the perfect place for a monster to conceal itself in. The isolated wooden area and concrete domes where explosives were stored during the Second World War already had an ominous ambience about it, and the labyrinth of underground tunnels was considered an ideal place for the creature to move about to avoid detection. The McClintock Wildlife Management Area, in which the TNT plant was located, was also a suitable setting for Mothman to evade discovery. Mary Heyer played a vital role in the growing interest of the being, as she would write about it in Where the Waters Mingle, a column mainly concerned with the goings-on in Point Pleasant. Her first article was written the day after the Scarberry and Millette sightings, and included the first description of the creature and her account of accompanying sheriff's deputies with a crowd of onlookers to the site. Her next article, Monster Returns to Mason, was published a day later, and by this time 6 more people had encounters with Mothman. By her third article, theories about this being an extraterrestrial creature were being floated, as well as consistent reports about the glowing red eyes. Then on December 15, 1967, tragedy struck. The silver bridge that connected Point Pleasant and Gallipolis, Ohio, was packed bumper to bumper during the late afternoon rush hour, when, without warning, the bridge collapsed into the Ohio River. 31 vehicles carrying 64 people plunged into the waters below. Of those 64, 46 lost their lives, with 2 of the bodies never being recovered. The tragedy became even more bizarre when witnesses came forward to report sightings of the Mothman in that general area just before the collapse. At this point, the creature became either a harbinger of doom or a forewarner of tragedy, and to this day remains associated in some form with the bridge's collapse. The real reason for the collapse was the strain on the bridge, which had been built to accommodate much lighter cars than the 4,000-pound average weight in 1967. The bridge's original engineers weren't very creative in their foresight of future usage, and as a result, there were no safety measures incorporated, as one part failing would result in a chain reaction where all of it failed. Mary Hyer's reporting would draw the attention of John Keel, a journalist and noted ufologist who invented the term Men in Black for men's adventure magazine Saga in 1967. He once carried a business card that read, "John A. Keel, not an authority on anything." Keel had some interesting takes on the UFO phenomena, believing that non-human or spiritual intelligences stage significant events over a long period of time in order to spread and reinforce flawed belief systems. He also used the term ultra-terrestrials to describe UFO occupants as non-human entities capable of assuming whatever form suited them. He would go on to write the Mothman Prophecies in 1975, which would be an account of his investigations into the creature spotted in and around Point Pleasant. Among these descriptions would be his encounters with the Men in Black, whom he would chase in order to confront them. He would often be informed of their presence by local police or residents, but would always seem to arrive a bit too late to meet face-to-face with them. He too claimed they would drive Cadillacs as their ride of choice, until they switched over for some reason to Volkswagens, perhaps to draw less attention. License plates that were run were again found to not have been registered to anyone. The controversial book became the basis for the film of the same name, starring Richard Gere as a journalist whose wife experiences a strange moth-like vision immediately before she's killed in a car accident. Keel died on July 3, 2009 in New York City at the age of 79. Sightings of the Mothman in West Virginia seem to have ebbed after the Silver Bridge incident, and Point Pleasant now holds an annual Mothman festival every 3rd week of September, and a metal statue adorns the town as a tribute to his celebrity status. While the legend of the Mothman is most associated with the sightings in Point Pleasant, reports of similar creatures have been made in other cities, notably Chicago, as well as various parts of the world, including Argentina and Germany. Now, there have been a number of alternate explanations as to what the people of Point Pleasant were witnessing all those years. Joe Nickel of the Skeptical Inquirer said it was likely a barred owl whose eyes were reflecting in headlights and glowed red, even though the largest owl recorded has only a 6-foot wingspan and is about 1.5 to 2 feet tall. Ornithologist Dr. Robert L. Smith dismissed it as a sandhill crane which only grows to perhaps 4 feet tall with a wingspan of 6 to 7 feet, also not indigenous to West Virginia. Neither species can fly 100 miles per hour either. Other explanations concern a hoax perpetrated by a local pilot who just wanted to throw a scare into people, and a textbook case of mass hysteria where people were so taken by the accounts that they spawned reports of alien craft, men in black, and even poltergeist activity. Did that go so far as to affect a rational reporter like Mary Hyre? It's not impossible, but it seems doubtful. As far as the Scarberrys and Millettes and the rest of the witnesses, they swear by what they saw, even to the time of their deaths. So in the wake of all the speculation and media sensationalism, it's entirely possible that we'll never know what the Mothman truly was.